Sometimes we need to send some data to the application. This is often the case when we need to fill out a form, log in with our credentials, or maybe add a product to a cart. For this action, we typically use a POST request. A POST request is different from a GET request because we are making a change on the server. For example, when we fill out a form and send it, the server now will have the data we have submitted and is typically stored somewhere in a database. So let's go ahead and see how we can make a POST request. And you can see here in the API documentation under registration and authentication, there are here a bunch of POST requests. And these are needed because essentially it deals with authentication. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first endpoint, which is a public endpoint, means that we don't need any authentication to use it. And this is used for registering a new user. We don't have a user with the application, so let's go ahead and register one. So let's take a look at if there's additional information in this request here. What you will see here, this is the path. So this is where this is going. And for this request, the application is also providing this HTML form. So it's providing us a graphical interface, but we also have access here like to the raw data that's being sent. So this is being sent over as JSON. Okay, I don't want to use the web interface. I want to use Postman because this is where we can get a bit more technical and understand what is happening behind the scenes. So let's go ahead and copy this address that we have here. And in Postman, I'm going to go ahead and open up a new tab. And let's simply go ahead and paste the address as we see it here. I'm going to click here on send. First, what we're getting back is 405 method not allowed. And it's actually telling us get is not allowed. And this is because instead of using post, we have used here get. So it's super important that we change from get to post. Okay, let's go ahead and try it again. This time we're getting back a different status code, and this one is 400 bad request. And it is telling us, hey, yeah, you want to register a user, but you haven't really provided the necessary information. In this case, it seems from the error itself that username and password are two fields that are required. Okay, so how can we provide this data? Well, we do this by submitting JSON. So a good starting point would be to just simply copy this response, which is already JSON, going here to body, and then from the options available, I'm going to select raw. And super important, apart from this, we're going to select here JSON. Don't confuse it with JavaScript, select here JSON. When we select here JSON, Postman automatically adds here a header, which is the content type header. And this is happening when the request is being sent. Okay, so let's go back to the body. We have here JSON selected, so we're going to paste what we had in the response. And what we'll see here is that this is an array. We don't need here an array, so I'm going to remove that. We need to put here between double quotes some username, so I'm going to call it test. And we also need a password. So we're going to use also a password, which is called test. So let's see if this registration will be successful. This looks like valid JSON. We don't have any errors around us. So I'm going to click here. And we're going to get here an error telling us, hey, a user with that username already exists. Okay, someone else had this smart idea. Status 400 bad request is what we're getting back. Okay, so let's try to make this a bit random. So we're going to make here an underscore. I'm just going to type in some, numbers. Doesn't matter what. Just something that probably nobody else has chosen before. I'm going to try it once again. And now what we're getting back is 201 created. So this is the response. We only provided a username. Additional parameters that we could have provided would have been first name, last name, and email. We don't worry about that right now. We're just happy that we have managed to create this first post request from Postman. Now let's go ahead and do the same from K6. So let's begin by first copying the address. And in K6, we're going to start here with the HTTP object. And instead of get, what we have used so far, we will use post. Okay, so I'm going to use post here. I'm going to paste here the address. And yeah, let's go ahead and run this. And we're going to run it with the HTTP debug flag, because this is super important. We want to try to understand what is happening, because if one of these requests is not working in case 6, we need to be able to troubleshoot that. So we're running this, and if we're taking a look at the results, what we're going to see here, where we're going to see here as part of the response 400 bad request, and it's going to tell us exactly as in Postman, username, this field is required, password, this field is required. And this is normal because we haven't sent a body, right? So how can we send a body with our request? Well, if you're taking a look here, it's maybe a bit hard to see, but the first argument that we're providing here is the URL. We did that. The second one is the body. So yeah, let's create a body. Just to make things a bit easier, I'm going to define here a new variable. I'm going to call it body. And this will be a JavaScript object. So what will this JavaScript object contain? Well, it will contain a property called username. And we're going to provide some username. And as a string, I'm going to use here test. And again, some random numbers, doesn't really matter. And password. Second one, it's going to be simply test. Super, super simple. This is JavaScript object. And this endpoint actually expects JSON. So we need to convert this to a JSON string. We do this by using the object JSON and with the method stringify. So essentially it's going to transform this in a string. We're going to put here the function call. So we're going to pass this object directly to the function call. So this is how it should look like. Okay, now body is a string. So all we have to do is provide it here as a second argument. And apart from this, we also need to send a header, right? So a header is also something super important. And this is part of the params. So params is like the third argument that we can provide to this function call. Let's go ahead and define params as well. What is params? Params is an object. So that's the first thing that we need to begin with. And what will params contain? It will contain headers. So headers is one of the properties. We need to write it exactly as you see it here. And what we need to provide is actually something that's called content type. So if we're not sure about the content type, we can always copy it from here. You see it here from the response. It's quite convenient to just copy it, and we're making sure that we're not making any mistakes. So we're going to put here content type between quotes and application JSON between quotes. We don't need to convert this to JSON because K6 knows how to pass this information as a JavaScript object and convert it to headers. So this is like one thing. It's an object, but we don't convert it to JSON. This is actually part of the body. We want to send JSON, so we need to convert that. So I'm going to pass here params as the second thing to the HTTP post request that we're making here. Okay, so hopefully you have everything in stock. So I'm going to run this. And what we're getting back here is status 201 created. That's super nice. This is something that we wanted to see. And we're going to get this information back here. Now, there's one more thing you should know, and that is you cannot create multiple users with the same data. So if you try this once again, and we're going to take a look here at the response, we're going to get 400 bad requests. A user with a username already exists. There is a quick way on how we can fix this, and this is by creating some random data. So what do I mean by random data? For example, we can add here a timestamp. So I'm going to remove these crazy numbers that I've added, and with the plus sign, I'm going to call here the date object, and on the date object, I'm going to call the method now. Okay, so this will add essentially a timestamp in milliseconds, essentially making our username dynamic. So let me show you what I mean by that. You're going to see here, it's still working, 201 created. And this is the current timestamp when this request was sent. So of course, if you're not sending multiple requests in the exact same millisecond, this is a quick way on how we can deal with this problem that I've shown earlier. So in a nutshell, this is how we can create a post request. You need to select http.post because this also indicates that you want to create a post request. You need to provide the URL, and then you need to provide a body. And if you're sending headers, you should also provide the parent.